Imagine a player who is strong, faster than average, with an explosive burst rarely seen in sports, and an absurd finishing ability. No, I'm not talking about Ronaldo phenomenon, but rather about him, George Weah, the first and only African player to ever be named the best in the world. That's right, he was one of the best of his time, and every team in the world wanted him. Weah received several invitations to become a French citizen, but he refused them all because, in his own words, "I love my country and I am proud to have been born there." Because of this, we never saw him play in a World Cup. Even so, his time at Milan, PSG, and Monaco was unforgettable. The plays he made were sensational, absurd, and worthy of a world's best player. That's how his nickname was born, quickly becoming popular across Liberia. King George Weah. To them, Weah was by far the best player their country had ever produced. After Marco van Basten left Milan, the club's fans were left without an idol and an elite player. But a while later, Weah arrived to fill that gap, and he did it masterfully. He was the kind of player who loved open space to showcase his explosiveness, never worrying about opposing defenders. Do you know why? Because he simply ran over anyone in his path. He would sprint toward the goal, stopping only after scoring. Yes, that was George Weah, the greatest footballer Liberia has ever produced and one of the greatest African players in history. George was born in Monrovia, the capital of Liberia. Like most people in his country, he was born into deep poverty, living in precarious conditions, where children had very few opportunities and little to no quality of life. But in the case of this young prodigy, things were even worse. He was abandoned by his parents and had to be raised by his aunt, Rebecca Lambe, and his grandmother. They lived in an extremely difficult community where food was scarce, hygiene conditions were poor, and violence was overwhelming, making it almost an unlivable place. But the three of them fought hard. "I had so many struggles growing up in a community where hope was as rare as food," he said years later. Liberia, much like Brazil, is a country passionate about football. Every child is practically born with a ball at their feet. It was no different for George. He loved playing with his friends on a dirt field near his home. However, his aunt and grandmother wanted him to focus on his education, as they never had that opportunity. Weah began attending Wells Hairston School, where he joined the football team and quickly caught everyone's attention. It became clear that this big, strong boy had an unusual talent with the ball. He joined Young Survivors, his first professional club, but soon started playing for various other teams because once people saw his talent, everyone wanted him on their side. But Weah had a decision to make. He wanted to change the lives of the women who raised him, his aunt and grandmother. And as much as he loved his country, he knew he wouldn't be able to do that by staying there. So he decided to try out for a club in Cameroon. If he succeeded, it would be his first international transfer and might even earn him some money. Not a lot, but something. Tonnerre decided to take a chance on Weah, and it turned out to be one of the best decisions the club ever made, because he would go on to become one of the best players in history. There, Weah continued to shine, winning 2 national championships. He was playing at an incredible level. Meanwhile, in Europe, Monaco was in desperate need of new stars, but didn't have much money to spend. That's when their coach, Arsene Wenger, came up with an idea. The top talent markets were already dominated by the Champions League giants, leaving Monaco with little chance of competing. So Wenger decided to look for talent in unusual places. He already knew that football was rapidly growing in Cameroon, so he sent one of his assistants there to scout for hidden gems. His plan was for the scout to spend a few months identifying promising players and bringing them back to Monaco. However, just a few days later, the assistant called and said, "I found our star." Wenger was surprised but trusted his scout. For £50,000, Monaco signed George Weah and brought him to Europe. The rest is history, and I can guarantee you, he would shake up the old continent like never before. At just 22 years old, Weah quickly became a key piece in Wenger's tactical system. Wenger would go on to become one of the most beloved figures in Weah's football career. To this day, the two remain very close friends, so much so that years later, Weah invited Wenger to his inauguration as the President of Liberia. At the red and white club, the star cemented his place with style, skill, and goals. avec toujours Georges dans les mémoires. His runs were fantastic, often reminiscent of Ronaldo's in the early days of his career. His shot was powerful and precise, and his physical build was perfect for an attacking player. He was like a war tank, unstoppable. During his time at Monaco, Weah won just one title, the 1991 Coupe de France, when the team defeated the mighty Olympique de Marseille, a squad that featured players like Manuel Amoros, Basile Boli, Bernard Cassoni, and many others. Before we continue the video, if you've made it this far and are enjoying the content, hit the like button down below. Producing these videos takes a lot of effort, and your like and subscription really motivate me to keep bringing more and more. If you're not subscribed yet, it's quick and easy. That way, you won't miss any of the channel's content. Now let's get back to the video. Monaco was playing incredibly well for a modest club, and it was all thanks to their exceptional striker. The biggest European clubs started keeping an eye on Weah, looking to lure him away. In 1992, he nearly won his first continental title, the UEFA Cup Winners' Cup, but his team was no match for Werder Bremen, who won the final 2-0. During his 4 years at Monaco, Weah scored 47 goals in the French league alone, becoming one of the club's top 10 all-time scorers with 66 goals in total. It's worth noting that, at the time, Monaco wasn't a club that frequently competed in international tournaments, which left Weah deeply frustrated, but he kept pushing forward at an unstoppable pace. That same year, 1992, PSG started making moves to build a legendary squad, and their first target? The player who was tearing it up at Monaco. The Parisian club went all in for Weah, and he couldn't resist. He made the move to the French capital. The biggest advantage PSG had over Monaco was their participation in international competitions. They played in all of them and had the squad to win some. This meant that for the first time, Weah had the chance to truly compete for major titles. And he was ready for it. After all, he wanted to make history. Wearing PSG's blue jersey, Weah continued to shine. In 1993, he won the Coupe de France, and all of Liberia celebrated the news. It was at this moment that his most famous nickname was born, King. Yes, to Liberians, Weah was a king. After all, the country had never produced a player as talented as him, an athlete with such incredible skills and a love for dribbling past opponents. In the 1993-94 season, he scored 11 goals that helped PSG win the French league, finishing 8 points ahead of Olympique de Marseille. The Champions League, the Cup Winners' Cup, and the UEFA Cup were his favorite tournaments. It seemed that whenever he stepped onto the field for one of these competitions, Weah shined brighter than anyone else. His technique, speed, and skill were simply incredible. Everyone was amazed that a player bought for such a low price could play at such an elite level. And let me tell you this, before the 1994 World Cup, French agents approached Weah. They wanted him to play for France in the tournament, but to do so, he would have to become a French citizen. His response was simple: "I am Liberian." You think that was the end of it? Not even close. Shortly after word of his refusal spread, the English national team also tried to recruit him. They even offered him money to change his nationality, but he gave them the same answer. Weah was never going to abandon his country, even if it meant never playing in a World Cup. His greatest moment as a player came in the 1994-95 season. Weah played at a level that no one could believe. Weah delivered incredible performances, one after another, scoring epic and out-of-this-world goals. This led PSG to a historic Champions League semi-final against the mighty AC Milan. It was a breathtaking two-leg clash, but in the end, Milan shined brighter and eliminated the Parisian side. The highlight of that season had come in the previous round, the quarterfinals against Barcelona. Two massive games. In Spain, a 1-1 draw with a goal from Weah. Then in Paris, a 2-1 victory for PSG, with goals from Rai and Guérin. His goal-scoring prowess in the Champions League made Weah PSG's all-time top scorer in European competitions, with 16 goals in 25 matches. To continue our story, we need to rewind a bit. In 1993, everyone believed that Marco van Basten would cement his place as one of the greatest players in history. After all, he was a two-time FIFA World Player of the Year and played for Milan, one of the strongest squads of the era. However, a severe knee injury sidelined him for 4 months. When he returned, he was no longer the same. After several failed comebacks, he announced to the world, "I am retiring from football." The news shook Europe and the entire football world. Van Basten was only 30 years old and had not even reached his physical peak, but his knee could no longer withstand the game. Faced with this enormous challenge, Milan needed a successor. And at that moment, an African striker was destroying defenses in France. That's why the Italian club made an offer to George Weah. He didn't think twice. Looking at Milan's squad, he knew he was about to join the best league in the world at the time, the Italian Serie A. His mission was simple yet enormous: replace Van Basten. Many doubted him, but he didn't care. He did what he always did when people underestimated him. He trained, trained, and trained. 1995 was a magical year for Weah. Not only was he the Champions League's top scorer and a new signing for the legendary AC Milan, but he was also playing at an unbelievable level. He wasn't a striker who waited for the ball to come to him. If it didn't reach his feet, he would go to midfield to get it. If necessary, he would drop back to defense and then explode forward. The best example of this was his goal against Verona in the Italian league. A masterpiece, a goal of pure genius, the goal of a striker who refused to be just another player on the pitch. George Weah was simply extraordinary, one of a kind, undoubtedly the best in the world. The star claimed the most prestigious individual awards of the season. He won France football's Ballon d'Or and FIFA's World Player of the Year award, by a landslide, securing both trophies with more than 50 points ahead of the runner-up. On top of that, he was also named African Player of the Year. This was the peak of one of the greatest players in history, an athlete born in one of the most challenging places in the world to grow up, a player who overcame violence, hunger, inequality, and all the hardships of his country. Yet his love for Liberia was never in question. He refused to change his nationality for any other country. This was George Weah, a star, a genius, a legend, the first and only African player to be named the world's best and to win the Ballon d'Or. You think that's the end of the story? Not even close. That same year, he was set to play in the African Cup of Nations for Liberia. But the country's football federation had no money to cover travel expenses. This put the national team's participation in the tournament at risk. Weah then called the federation's president and said, "Register Liberia, I'll pay for everything." And that's exactly what he did. Unfortunately, the team didn't make it past the group stage. But that act made him not just a football idol in Liberia, but a national hero. From 1995 to 2000, Weah won 2 Italian league titles and scored 46 goals for Milan. His plays were dazzling. His dribbles humiliated defenders. However, as he aged and Milan built a new squad, he lost his starting spot. His game was no longer the same, but his technique remained untouched. In his final years, he played for Chelsea, winning the FA Cup in 2000, before moving on to Manchester City, Olympique de Marseille, and Al Jazeera in the UAE. Then in 2003, he decided to hang up his boots. After a brilliant football career, Weah dedicated himself to supporting underprivileged youth in Liberia. He founded an amateur football team, helped build a children's hospital and a sports school, and launched numerous social projects to assist families in need. But he knew that with his own money, he could only help a limited number of people. That's why he entered politics. He ran for president of Liberia multiple times, and in 2017, he was elected with over 60% of the vote, the country's first democratic transition of power since 1994. At his inauguration, Weah made sure to invite Arsène Wenger because, according to him, he was only standing there thanks to his old friend and former coach at Monaco. That was the story of George Weah, a legend, a hero, an icon of Liberia, a player who did everything, won almost everything, and above all, a man who gave up playing in the World Cup to honor his homeland. What do you think about this legend story? Do you believe he made the right choice by not switching nationalities to play in a World Cup? Drop your thoughts in the comments.